The only thing that will really help you is to develop the power to reshape the relationship in a positive way. You can't do this as long as you're caught up in your immediate reactions. Active love gives you the power to transcend them. This is the real power of a spiritual approach to psychology. It teaches you how to activate higher forces, which are stronger than your emotions. These forces won't replace your emotions, but they will transform them. As you stop wasting energy on superficial annoyances, the important things in life will move you more deeply. The human ego doesn't like to experience anything more powerful than itself. The more committed you are to this vulnerable state, the more power you'll feel. This comes as a shock to most people. That's because they don't understand what real power is. Real power doesn't come from you as an individual. It comes from the fact that you're channeling something greater than you. When you have real power, you have no need to prove anything to anyone. Free of your own ego, you're functioning from the highest part of yourself. In this state, you can inspire the higher parts of those around you. It's the only way conflict is truly resolved.
Where is that from?
It is, it's called The Tools by Phil Stutz and Barry Mitchells. I just watched Stutz on Netflix, which is a really big mental health documentary that was directed by Jonah Hill. And it was kind of profound. And I started reading that book, and I thought that was really interesting because coming here, I was very nervous. And then I realized that people's perceptions, it's all just my own construct that I've built in my own head. So
Where are you from, Gracie?
I am from two places. I am from Utica, New York, which is a population of about 60,000 people, and it's a refugee haven, so 1 in every 3rd person in my population is a refugee. And then I am also from Ilion, New York, which is a population of about 5,000 to 7,000 people. And I lived in Utica from the day I was born until the age of 5. And I always remembered loving being a city kid. My brother and I would ride my bike down to the little corner bodega, and it was just really interesting. But I also grew up in a very impoverished area of my city on the east side. My dad was a hoarder, so when you walked into my house, we had one clear pathway. Everything was boxes up to the walls, and cobwebs hanging down, ripped insulation, ripped walls. It was really interesting. He had lived in that house since the day he was born. Both of his parents also died in there. He has a lot of trauma. And my mom had kind of gotten very depressed in the environment. He sat in his room all of the time. So when I was 5, she decided to leave him, and we moved on over to Ilion, New York, which is quite a smaller suburb and much different than I was used to. And it was interesting. I have a very deep memory. You know, your memory starts developing from the age of 2 to 7, I think I read. So that's when you're starting to get a sense of your surroundings, a sense of your nervous system, and observing everything around you. So it was quite a big shock to move from everything. And it made sense, though. My mom wanted to be in a place where she didn't have to have mouse traps all over and cobwebs and live like that. My father's always just been that way, and it's unfortunate watching him in that way. But when I was 3, my therapist calls it a form of molestation. I was molested by my first cousin. We had a strong family dynamic. My entire family was around. My grandmother, my grandfather, my brother, my cousins, everyone. And I guess I had told my mom about it, and I don't remember much of the scenario, being 3, 4 years old. And she decided that, she took me to the hospital and all that, and the rape kit, they were like, no, there's no penetration, but he still, would pleasure himself and then, finish on to me, relieve himself of whatever. And what sucked about that is I assumed it was normal. Because that's your family, and you're taught, I think most people are taught from a young age that your family are people that you love and you trust, and they unconditionally love and trust you and would never put you in harm's way and always have your best interest at heart. And I assumed that because this person was my family, that it wasn't a wrong thing, and I didn't see it anything more than just like a weird interaction and form of love, whatever that term is. And they were like, they never let us be alone in a room again, and they sent him to a thing. I don't know if it exists anymore, but I kind of compare it to like a Beyond Scared Straight program. But it's like shock camp is where they sent him. And he was out of the picture for a few years, but then he came back. And we had all moved to Ilion. So my mom moved, and then my grandparents followed suit, and then my aunt followed suit, and my first cousin and her two children moved in with my grandparents, and everyone was just kind of conglomerated in one little bubble there. And I remember starting school. I was always the weird one, and I got bullied from a very young age. They used to tell me I had a big nose. They used to call me Matilda. I don't know why. So I just remember never really liking going to school because I had a really hard time making friends. It was super hard for me. And when I was about 5 or 6, my second cousin was about the same age as me, and they had started getting curious, and we would often be naked around each other in weird scenarios at my grandparents' house, in their room, and I just assumed again that this thing was normal, and that's just what families did. And we were kids, and I didn't think any different of it. I assumed that it was normal, but I didn't realize how much it would have a profound impact on me and the way I socialized. And I remember telling my mom again, and she told my grandmother, and my grandmother was like, "You need to send her to therapy." I'm like 6 years old, I don't even know what's going on. And I remember seeing a therapist briefly with my mom in the room, and it was really hard to communicate with her there. But it kind of dissipated and never really happened again after that. And from there, I just, I went to school, and the bullying was intense. As I got older, I started reading, and that was great. Reading was a huge escape for me. I would read all the time, every book I could get my hands on. And that really helped me. I kind of didn't need friends. My books were my friends. And every moment I got the chance to read, I was reading. And my grandparents were very harsh, so I often tried to escape in that way, sitting on the couch, sitting at the table, being outside reading. My mom worked long hours, so they would often babysit me after school. And my grandmother was very emotionally abusive and very manipulative, so she would often find anything she could pick on me for, just make me feel very unloved. And it kind of really set a weird precedent for me, because it's like, this is family, someone I'm supposed to unconditionally love, but it doesn't seem like they're reciprocating that back to me. And I never understood why. But my mother had a pretty traumatic childhood growing up, so it made sense. She has 4 other siblings, and they grew up in a very small town, like population 132, and they moved around a lot as well. And my grandmother never worked until she got married for the 4th or 5th time. And they were never attended to. She told my mom straight to her face one day that She never wanted any of her children. She just wanted babies. And once they hit like 2, she didn't want them anymore. Well, once they could become more self-sufficient, she was like, you can walk, do dishes, do your thing, exist. And so it was really rough for my mom. She tells me some things, and she also was molested as a child, so it didn't make it any easier because the generational trauma just passed right down. So eventually, my mom kind of stepped them away because I would just always complain that I wasn't happy there with my grandparents all the time. And she started trying to find me babysitters and stuff, but there was a period where she had gotten a parasitic infection, so she was in the hospital for like 8 days, and she couldn't remember anything. It was really, really terrible, and I had to stay with them that entire time. And I remember I was playing with my younger cousin, and they said something, and I can't remember what the exact scenario was, but I was like, well, you're not that special. And he just started crying, and he goes and tells my grandmother. And she comes and just backhands me across the face, and she drags me by my hair into this chair. She makes me call my mother, who's in the hospital with this insane infection, and tell her what had happened. Tell her that I told my cousin exactly word for word that I told him he wasn't special. And at that moment, I kind of realized that I had to silence myself. I could never stick up for myself or say anything because it had to be in that one way. And I think that ends up being true for a lot of people in that kind of family dynamic, especially more like suburban rural families that are used to that same upbringing, small town. So after that, is really when my mom was like, okay. And she had a couple of other babysitters for me who were just as intense, constantly bullying me, progging me, torturing me, just making me feel like I was a really terrible and ugly child. And I never really understood it, and I just, accustomed all of this to normal, this extremely normal thing. Like, this is, it doesn't happen to every kid, but it must happen to most kids. And I kind of just worked my way through it, always kept to myself. I was always listening to music. Music was my escape. I'm very grateful. There's this corny quote, used to be on a Zoomy shirt. It says, when words fail, music speaks. But I always remember that because it's very true. So when I was about 10, my mom had gotten a boyfriend. And he was a retired veteran. He had served about 10 years in Afghanistan. And he had a lot of PTSD. So we moved in with him pretty briefly right after she started the relationship. And it was about 2 months in, and I always just had an off feeling, but it was my mom. I didn't really want to say anything. I couldn't really say anything because I was a child. What did I know? And about 3 months into that relationship, and when we had moved into him, I had been dropped off by my dad from school, and he asked me to come downstairs, and he said, you're getting older, and your mom wants me to show you some things. And he taught me how to kiss, how I'm supposed to kiss a man. And mind you, at the time, he's like 35, 37 years old, and I'm about 10. And again, he said that my mom was the one who wanted me to do it. So, I didn't want to question it as a child. You don't question your parents or their decisions. They always know best. And so I just kind of assumed it was this normal thing again that was happening. And it eventually turned into a lot of extreme sexual abuse afterwards. And we had moved into his house, which was about 30 minutes away from where my mom and I had lived, and then we moved back into our house. And it continued there. And he would often force us to do things like, oh no, you probably, so long ago, it feels like it's not that long ago, but like the Wii, do you know what I'm talking about? Like the Wii games. So he would make us all play that naked together, me, him, and my mom was there, and I actually just talked to her about this last week. I'm like, why did you think that was normal for a 10, 11-year-old girl to be naked around a middle-aged man? And she said she didn't know, and she should have. My mom's always been free-spirited in the way where, she could be naked all the time. She would, she could find a way to function in society naked. I think she would, and that's beautiful, and I love that about her. But I just always thought as a kid being around men and being naked was extremely uncomfortable. So, and we would shower together too, the three of us, and I just remember it being this extremely uncomfortable, unsettling experience, and I could never vocalize it. And finally, I had just gotten so enraged, I had gotten so depressed, I couldn't even read anymore or listen to music. I couldn't function in school, and nobody at school was really picking up on the signs either, which was unfortunate because I feel like if, another adult could have picked up on the signs, maybe something could have been done about it sooner, but everything happens for a reason, and I had mostly great teachers, so, I don't judge them for not reading the signs. It's hard to, how do you know, especially when you're a kid and you just accustomed to it as normal or this thing, and you don't really talk about it. So it continued for about 2 years, and he had gotten really bad. He was an alcoholic. He was waking up and drinking every day, like bottles of Jose Cuervo, which is like the worst tequila, but I'm not going to judge someone's taste. And he had just gotten really bad, and I remember there was one night where I just had gotten into a really bad screaming rage, and and I had called my dad, not my mom, she was there, but I had called my dad, and he was with my first cousin at the time, and I had called him to pick me up. It was like 8, 9 o'clock at night, and I was just screaming at him, and I was like, "You're a molester, like you're a child predator," and he was just laughing, and he wasn't saying anything, and eventually my dad showed up, and they just waited in the car. I was getting ready to go out. My mom was like, "Nope, you're staying here," and she just pulled me right back into it. And I remember going upstairs and slamming my door. I was really angry. My dad, who's supposed to be there, who's supposed to protect me, who's supposed to take me away from situations like this, he still doesn't even know to today what happened to me as a child most of the time. About 95% of it, he doesn't even know. And I don't want him to know. He had a really terrible childhood. So it's just kind of easier in that way. And he has a couple of learning disabilities, so it's just easier mentally because he just wouldn't really understand. So I remember getting back upstairs, slamming my door, and he gotten so angry he drilled and took all the nails out of my door, and he took my door off. So now I'm this 11-year-old growing girl, and I have no sense of privacy. My bedroom door has been taken off, which of course then makes it easier for him to come into my bedroom at night, which he did. And my mom and I had a really deep, moving conversation last week, and and I told her, I was like, why would you let someone do that, and she goes, I can name you 10 different parents that would have done that if their child slammed the door like that. And I'm like, and I can name you 10 different parents as well that wouldn't have done that. And we just kind of let it go at that. But my mom eventually decided to leave. It was really hard leaving. He threatened to burn our house down and kill all of us in it, which was terrifying because I am this preteen girl and I can't talk to anyone at school about it. And, and whenever I did threaten it, he's like, who do you think they're going to believe? Like, I'm a decorated, veteran. I am a person who has served and fought for this country, and you are a small child. And he would always use that to his advantage and manipulation to make sure that I always kept my mouth shut. And she eventually left. It was really hard. He threw a remote at her face one day, and I think that's really what kind of drove her to leave. And we then moved in with my aunt, who, by the way, had also slept with him. So it was a really uncomfortable situation because he cheated on my mom with her sister. And now the three of us are in this house together. Very small, and he would drive around the block. He would terrorize us for like the first 3 months. I remember him like popping my mom's tires or just showing up uninvited. It really sucked. Because I always just felt uncomfortable around him. I never wanted my friends to come over because I wanted to protect them from him. And there was a brief period where my brother and my sister-in-law lived with us too, and I would always wait until she went to bed or she was upstairs for me to go to bed because I was just so scared that he would do something to her. And then we eventually moved out, and it was kind of a relief. It just felt like this extremely traumatic period of life and felt like I had lived 10 years in a matter of almost 2 years. But it made me really strong, which I'm grateful for. And it also taught me the beauty of silence, because I think had I had gone through and, really gone through the effort of telling people, which I think people should, I just felt like it would have done more damage to me. So we moved in with my aunt, and then we moved in with my grandfather. And my grandfather had kind of known. And I don't know how he knew, he just knew. And we were in his car one day, and he said, if something's going on, you need to tell me. And he was like, so I can take care of it. And I was too scared because he was in his 60s at the time, and he was this amazing man, and I knew if he really put his heart to it, he probably could have, but I was just so scared. He was like the only man I could really trust besides my dad, and the only man that I truly loved, so I didn't want anything bad to ever happen to him. And that's why I just kind of always kept shut about it. And during that time afterwards, I became extremely hypersexual. I was the girl in school everyone came to about sex. Anything you wanted to know about sex, I am an open book. I will tell you everything you want to know. A lot of it is also because of the internet. I think a lot of, not even just my sexual abuse as a kid, but being exposed to porn at a very early age created a lot of misguidance for me because I was very confused. And I kind of all just looked at it as the same thing. And I also was an Omegle kid. I don't know if you've ever heard of that website. Pretty traumatic stuff happens on there, some pretty dirty stuff. It was just like this website where you could go on live, talk to strangers, but you would see some of the most disgusting, terrible things, and my friends would just think it was hilarious. We're all small town kids, and they're just, seeing things on the internet and thinking it's not either real or it's just funny. And for me, I just always remember being very desensitized to a lot of sex things, sex culture. And we eventually moved back to Utica, and that's just because the bullying at my school had gotten really bad. And I think a lot of it was my hypersexuality. I got pregnant at 14 years old with the first person I had consensual sex with. And it was terrifying, because you're a girl, you're having sex for the first time. It's supposed to be this magical, wonderful experience. It was far from that. He was watching Goosebumps in the background. So it wasn't really that romantic. And then, your first time having sex, and then, 6-7 weeks later, you're pregnant. And I didn't know what to do. And I'm very grateful for the couple of girls that I went to school with, because one was able to get a test for me, and another girl's mom had been like, hey, if you don't want to go through with this, they were willing to drive me to Planned Parenthood. So I'm really grateful for that small support system at the time, and I did, but I told my mom. So I ended up getting an abortion at 14 years old. And it was a very traumatic experience, and I didn't really think about how much it would impact my life until the most recent years. And I think it's just because as a woman, we love to love, and part of our, when we're connecting with our womb and this sacredness, giving birth is a part of that, having a child is a part of that. And it ended up creating a lot of pain for me afterwards, because I didn't know how to be a normal person. I had to carry that on my back for a long time, and where I was from, abortions were controversial. There were girls that, when I was 12 years old that were pregnant, and there were girls at 14 years old that were pregnant, girls that were 16 on their second kid. And I'm very grateful, because I feel like I wouldn't be where I am now if I had had children. I wouldn't be able to be sitting here right now if I had had children and be able to share my experience or be as self-aware as I am. But there was a lot of trauma that came after it, so I ended up moving back to Utica, and we moved back in with my dad, because at this time he became disabled 100%, so he has sciatica all down his right side of his body. He has arthritis head to toe. His heart is functioning at 40%. He has 2 broken valves on top of a heart murmur, and he's 300 pounds. And he's a hoarder. So we moved back in with him. My mom kind of became his caretaker, and it was really stressful, because you're just watching this person who you used to be able to drive with and go to the movies with and do things that can no longer move. He can't lay down. He can't, he can't sometimes go to the bathroom properly. And he, for the longest time, wouldn't shower. And he would just have this odor. It was so bad. You'd walk into my house, and he just, I couldn't even hug my own dad. And that for me was the worst feeling in the world, that I couldn't hug my own dad, because he couldn't take care of himself. And I pushed through it. And I graduated high school. My last 2 years I was homeschooled. I had gotten such bad anxiety. It was so bad that I couldn't even complete a full school day. But I really regret that. Because my school had a program, so a tutor would just come to my house 3 hours a day. And I'm very lucky. I was a gifted kid, and I was smart enough, in an honors classes, that I could, just read 3 hours worth of packets and retain all of my information and go on with my day. But I didn't really get that school experience my last 2 years of high school. And I missed out on a lot of socialization that really set me far behind socialization-wise. So, yeah, my dad didn't even come to my graduation. And that was such a huge milestone for me. My brother dropped out, and it was just really important to me that I graduated high school. And in all of our business classes, I had the highest GPA, and I won this $500 award. I was so proud of myself. I was so excited. In high school, yeah, that was a really interesting time. My mom, she couldn't stand living with my dad, so we'd do anything to escape. She put me in all-star cheerleading. So I competed all over the U.S. nationally my last 4 years, and I did some briefly. I didn't compete, but the year after I graduated, I just went to open gyms and stuff. And that it was really fun in the adrenaline rush sense. I felt like it kept me away from some hard drugs. I feel like I definitely could have gotten into some really hard drugs had I not had that sport as an outlet. I think certain sports can be really important, but what was unfortunate about that industry is you always had to look a certain way. So you had to be a certain weight, you had to have your hair a certain way. And I just remember bleaching my hair every 3-4 weeks, and I would just get so tired of it. And the spray tans, I'd get so tired of it. I mean, and I was just grateful my mom could afford all of this, and we could do this and travel and have this fun. But, you know, my dad could never come to any of it. So it just always felt like, what was the point? So yeah, we did that for a while. And then I eventually just got tired of feeling like I needed to look a certain way. I couldn't be a Barbie doll. I couldn't lose enough weight. I, you know, had gymnast thighs. You know, I couldn't, you know, be in the front for a lot of things when I felt like I'd worked hard enough. So I left that. And it was kind of a sigh of relief because I felt like I was able to start developing myself. I didn't have to have this personality of being a cheerleader, you know, but I think it's a great sport. It's one of the most dangerous sports in the world, just doing it. I mean, the tax it took on my body afterwards, you know, I have a lot of issues that I have to deal with because of it. And I took a gap year after that. Everyone should take a gap year after they get out of high school. I think that's really important. If there's one thing I can offer, take a gap year after high school. I was able to travel. I went to Alaska, and that was so much fun. I got to go on a bunch of trains, and it was just super cool. And then I ended up coming back, and I worked a couple of different jobs, which was great because it allowed me to get so much experience. I worked at a scenic railroad. I was a waitress. I was working at an acai bowl restaurant, and was really awesome. And then I decided to go to college. Was the first time I was away from my family. I was about 4 hours away, so I was in Westchester, New York, which is a beautiful place. And I was away from my family for the first time, and I was just so grateful that I went to college. You know, I only had one other cousin that went to college, and I don't even know if she graduated or not, but nobody in my family had gone to college, really. So it was just this huge milestone for me because, you know, I'd started drinking in high school, and it was really bad. You know, I was drinking, especially my senior year, because I was homeschooled. I didn't have anything to do. I was drinking like 1 or 2 bottles of wine a day. And it had gotten really bad. And, you know, even during all those jobs in my gap year before college, you know, I still had a lot of falling out with my mental health. You know, I started smoking weed, and weed's great. Weed allowed me to really dig deep within myself and creatively explore myself as an individual. And it reduced a lot of anxiety that I had, and I think in a medicinal sense, cannabis is great, but cannabis-induced psychosis is also real, and that's something that scares me as more places continue to legalize it, because that can really set you back as well. So I went to college. I was drinking a lot, smoking weed a lot, but I was doing really well. I was making friends, I was doing classes, and that was great. I love to learn. I'm a lifetime learner. If I could be paid to go to college for the rest of my life and learn everything about everything, I would, because I love to learn. I think life is all about learning. And, you know, I just loved learning so much. And it took a lot because, you know, I was extremely traumatized. I was extremely hypersexual. And at college, I was hoping to get away from all of that. I didn't want to date. I didn't want to have sex. And I think I was maybe like a month into this semester when I had been on a dating app, but I was mostly looking for friends, and which is a joke because dating apps are just meant for insecure people trying to fill a void. And so I would match with a lot of people, and then I would meet, and then they're like, oh, I want to have sex with you, not hang out with you. And I'm like, okay. Because I was very vulnerable and insecure at the time. And I was like, well, at least I'm getting paid attention to and, you know, making friends. And if this is the way I make friends, this is the way I make friends. And there was a night where I'd made friends with a student, and he was like, I'm really drunk. I can't go back to my dorm. Can I stay in your dorm? And I was like, sure. And I had told him, I was like, you're drunk, I don't want to have sex with you, like, please don't have sex with me. And he forced me to have sex with him anyways. And then I just had to go back to normal after that. I went to a super small college, so we saw each other all of the time, and I already know how bad it is when it comes to college students and sexual assaults, I mean, it's just, it happens all of the time, and universities don't really do anything about it or advocate for the people that go through it. So I just, I didn't really want to go through a whole process. They were, pretty high up at the college, and I didn't want to waste my time and my mental energy to have to go through that. But I pitied myself a lot because I was like, again, like, come on, like, you've been through this so much from a child. Now you're an adult, you're a grown woman, and you're just still letting people take advantage of you and manipulate you, and you're not saying no, and you're not learning your boundaries, and why are you not doing that? And then I got my first college boyfriend, and he had dissociative identity disorder, so that was really intense. Because I'm a person with extreme childhood trauma, anxiety. I had a bit of a substance abuse issue, and they had this severe mental illness. Working through that relationship was really interesting because there were moments where it was really beautiful, and love's great, it doesn't matter. I mean, even if a person has, a mental illness, you can still find to love deeply and have a wonderful relationship, and we did. But it had just gotten so bad for both of us. We had just been trauma bonding so deeply at that point that it just had gotten too much. So we called things off, which was great because a worldwide pandemic decided to happen my second semester of college. So it was like a week. We went back to school after break, and then it all started happening. And they weren't sure whether or not they were going to send us home. And then there was a day where they're like, you have 72 hours, you have to get all your stuff out, you have to go. So I went back home. And that was really rough because it was finally I'd escaped my family, I'd escaped my life. I was starting a new life for myself. I was figuring myself out, and not many people get the opportunity to do that. And I was so grateful and humbled for that experience. And then just to have it all ripped away, taken away. And I can't blame a pandemic, but it sucked. It was like my entire heart and soul had been like chewed through, and I just had to, I had to start all over again. And my first cousin, who had molested me when I was 3 years old, had now moved in with my parents because he had been kicked out of his house. So when I was coming back home, he had been sleeping in my bedroom for like 3 months. And my mom didn't know how to tell me. She avoided telling me for the longest time. Because it's like, how do you tell this person that's hurt your child that they're now sleeping in your bed? And during that time, I had a lot of time to reflect and take time to myself and ask my mom questions about his childhood. And, he had it pretty fucked up as well. According to my mom, like his parents would like have sex in front of their kids. Like it didn't matter if it was 1 o'clock and like his dad wanted to have sex and like his mom was out in the kitchen, they were doing it on the kitchen table. And he was exposed to sex at a very early age. And my brother says he got suspended at 9 years old for having sex on the school bus. So I had kind of taken time to reflect on a lot of that. And I forgave him because he didn't know any better. He only knew what he was brought up with. He only knew that form of sex and that form of love. And that's really hard to sit and forgive someone and then continue to let them live in your home and sleep in your room and coexist. It took a lot out of me. But it's much easier than living life in anger and in spite and in sadness and feeling like the victim. because I am a survivor, I'm not a victim. And then also, we're just products of our environment, and that was our environment. And I could hate him for the rest of my life, or I could move on from the situation because he never did it again. And it was the same way with the boyfriend that my mom had had, what was his childhood like? I don't know. And I remember the day I forgave him too. I had gone to church. I briefly play around with religion, and I had gone to church one day. I was about 15. And I can't really remember what was said, but I remember it being so moving. And after that, I decided to forgive him too, because I didn't know his upbringing. I didn't know his background. I don't know what he went through as a child. And then on top of that, to fight in a nasty war and to be, a part of that, fighting for your country, that's extremely traumatic as well. And to have, complex post-traumatic stress disorder on top of that, I could spend the rest of my life in anger, or I could forgive them because, in Buddhism, when you have, even just the slightest instant of anger, it destroys eons of your good karma that you've made for yourself. So I was like, if I'm angry at them, it's never going to do anything for me. I'm going to continue escaping. I'm going to continue drinking. I'm going to continue smoking. I'm going to continue trying different things. And I just didn't want that. I didn't want that for myself. And it's hard because not a lot of people can reach that level of self-awareness where they can fully forgive someone for doing something so terrible to them. And then on top of that, let one of them live in your home or sleep in your bed after that. But I'm very grateful that I did. And that's very controversial. It's very controversial for me to say that because there are so many people that have been abused, and they have the right to be angry, and they have the right to be upset, and they have the right to not forgive. But the problem is that when you're not forgiving them, you're also not forgiving yourself for knowing that you didn't know what was going on at the time, and you were a child. And I needed to forgive myself, and by forgiving myself, I was able to forgive them too. I kept doing classes online. I took a semester off, like the second semester of COVID. And then I went back for another semester at the same college, and I had met my second partner at that time, ex-partner, and they had a really heavy addiction. So they were smoking a lot, drinking a lot. They had been experimenting with other things, and I had kind of delved into that, and they came from a very privileged background, so they could kind of get out of anything. Their parents would take care of it. And it was a beautiful relationship. They were probably the person that really taught me like what love is, what to be loved by another person is, and to be taken care of. But ultimately, they kind of chose that lifestyle over me, and that was something I didn't want anymore. I wanted to wake up every day, feel grateful for life. I hated waking up and just like smoking weed all day. It's fun at first when you're waking and baking, but after that, you kind of just want to live life and see something else. So I moved to Colorado, and I started school at a Buddhist university because I had done a lot of yoga and meditation over the pandemic, and that truly changed my life. I wouldn't be able to deal with my trauma or sit here and be here talking to you if I had not learned yoga and meditation. I wouldn't be able to stop myself from doing other substances. When I tried Xanax, I was just, on it. I was trying it. I was doing it a lot every day. And over the pandemic, it's hard, you're isolated. What else is there to do, especially if you're in a smaller place? So I went to college. I went to Colorado. Didn't know anything about it before I moved there. I just moved there. Never thought I'd end up there. And it had gotten very hard to live there. It's very expensive, and when you don't come from a wealthy family, it's even harder to afford it there. So I got into sugaring on a website called Seeking Arrangements, which is where you sleep with older men for money. And I started doing that because I had wanted to continue living in Colorado where I was living. And I just loved it there, and I was so far away from everybody. I didn't have to worry about anything. I still had to worry about my dad. He was hospitalized like 3 times during the time that I was there. And it was an easy business because I'm very business oriented in the sense that I knew how it worked. You know, I read a bunch of Reddit threads, I watched a bunch of videos, and I was like, okay, if I take it from like a dominatrix standpoint and I do this in a way where it's like, okay, you look at the demographic of the people on the website. There's men that are lonely. There's men that are very discreet, you know, married, have children, are in their business, doing their thing, but obviously aren't happy in their lifestyle or their marriage. So I come along. And it was very easy to start pick-pointing. And because I'd been exposed to the internet at a very early age, I was able to kind of fish out scammers. Like I was like, okay, this person's not real. This person is, and it was a very easy way to get quick cash and allow me to continue living in Colorado. And I was pretty good at it. It was pretty easy because a lot of the times, you know, I was really good at like picking out the men, and a lot of them, like half the time I wouldn't even have sex with them. I'd just be like their personal therapist for an hour or two. Or they couldn't get hard, so like they would just pay me to lay down with them, and that was super easy. I was like, oh great, this is a great business. I should have been, you know, I should have started this earlier. And eventually that got tiring too, because you're doing it all the time and it becomes like a full-time job. And for me, it was more so like, not really a hobby, but an extracurricular activity that I had taken up and was enjoying. So I kind of, you know, I kept doing it, and I had to move out of Colorado because I was in a really shitty roommate situation. And they had been using a lot of drugs and getting in a lot of, like, been doing a lot with it, and I just didn't want to be a part of that. I was trying to get sober. When you're in Colorado, all you do is drink and smoke. And I was doing a ton of mushrooms too, which, you know, I love mushrooms. Psychedelic medicine changed my life. But it just wasn't feasible for me to live there anymore because I knew it wasn't the best for my mental health. So I had gotten out of there, and I'm grateful because, you know, a lot of people that I'd end up meeting on seeking arrangements, the one thing I hated about it is they would just like all fall in love with me because I'm a very vulnerable and emotionally intelligent, self-aware person. And a lot of these men, especially if they were married for 20, 30 years and like had no idea how to live life after getting divorced, they were just like, you know, I brought a very youthful energy to them, and they really enjoyed that about me because I could make them feel comforted, safe, and nurtured, and I brought that. And it was great because, you know, I met a lot of great people that helped me and supported me in doing the things that I wanted, and you know, and occasionally still do if I need it. But it was a tiring lifestyle because it's like a lot of them are drinking, a lot of them are sometimes using drugs too. And even though it's a lot different from, you know, prostituting per se, you know, it was just like a tiring lifestyle where it's like, you know, especially if I'm spending the night, it's like, oh, I have to have sex with you like 5 times a day, you know, and like, this is the only way I'm gonna get paid. Like, you know, we can't just sit here and have a heart-to-heart conversation and be two humans functioning in the same space. Like, I just have to be this, you know, illuminating sexual energy person and give you that so I can get money, so I can just afford to live. All of it was out of survival. It was more so, I want to escape my family. I want to provide myself a good life. I want to learn how to do things. You know, I never learned how to be financially free or successful, and doing that allowed me to learn how to do those things because a lot of them were very open. You know, Colorado, I think, is one of the best places to get into sugaring because a lot of them are extremely safe. A lot of them are very easy to get along with and find, and not worrying about scammers and just being treated really well. So I'm very grateful because it wasn't an entirely terrible experience for me. I don't regret it. But it was just, it got really exhausting. It was so emotionally exhausting, and I just gotten really depressed. So
do you feel like the sexual things that happened to you as a young girl
played in it? Oh, absolutely.
Opened the door for that?
Oh, yeah.
To happen?
100%. I would, you know, when I was at my first college in New York, you know, I thought about doing it, but in New York City, it's extremely dangerous. It's so much more bigger. And you know, dudes would be like, let's meet at Grand Central. I'm like, I'm not meeting you at Grand Central Station. Absolutely not. So I didn't do it. And, you know, and was very emotional at that time. And then when I was in Colorado, someone I knew had been doing it. So that's why I was like, okay, well, this person's doing it and they're alive and they're safe. So, green light, I'll go and do it. But yeah, I feel like if I'd never been sexually abused as a child or been exposed to porn at a very early age, I probably never would have done it. But, I started looking at it more from a business aspect. And, and a lot of the times I wasn't even having sex with them. So it ended up working out just as well, because it was like half the time I was just paid to be like a companion. And I'm pretty good at that. So I was doing that, and then I moved back in with my mom, and I was doing it for a little bit there with her, not with her, but like in the house, like co-living with her, and I was just so depressed I stopped. And it's so easy. I mean, for some people it's not that easy, because unfortunately for some people it's all they know. And I'm very grateful that I got the opportunity to stop, and I have a job now and I can do things for myself. And I'm still living paycheck to paycheck, and that's okay.
How old are you now?
22.
22.
And I feel like I've gone through a million lifetimes. And I'm very grateful for it all. I mean, some of it's really awful and you don't think about it, but it's like I just sit back with complete gratitude, because all of it has shown me how to be a true human, what that means. And it's shown me a lot of light. And that's really hard for a lot of people to say, because, once you're caught in lifestyles like that, it's very hard to get out of it. I've been sober from weed for like 60 days now, which is really good, because I hadn't taken a break from it in like 3 years. And I've been sober from alcohol for like almost it's been past 30 days now. And I haven't been doing ketamine in a while either, which is great. And it really just, it was all an experience, and I'm grateful for the experience, but a lot of it was really related to my trauma and what it did, and it showed me, and this is what it's like. And, the reason I am here is because we have the collaborative vision of making sure that this doesn't continue in future generations, and I see my family, my nieces, going through a lot of, not the sexual trauma, but emotional trauma. And I see kids around them going into all that trauma, especially when you're stuck in areas like that, that are more impoverished, and you don't really you're not exposed to anything else, because you become accustomed to it as normal. And it's not normal. It's not normal. And there's so much more to life than your insecurities and your family. And my dad's in the hospital right now, and I made the effort to come here and do this, because for me, sharing this and letting people know that there is hope and you can get out of it is so much more important to me, I've been studying Tibetan Buddhism for 2 years, and, there's this concept of a bodhisattva, and it's where you risk obtaining enlightenment for yourself for the sake of all others. And I feel like for me, this is a vow in doing that, because it's been so hard to wake up every day, to go to work, with everything that I've gone through. It gets so exhausting. There are days where I don't want to wake up. There are days where, I wish I didn't wake up. And I do, and I make the effort, and it's so difficult. And it's difficult now to not, download Seeking, go on Seeking, and gain more money than what I'm making now. But it's just, at the risk of what it was doing to me, at the risk of me finding simplicity and happiness, it wasn't worth it anymore.
What would you say is the most important lesson you've learned in all of this? You seem like a pretty wise 22-year-old.
Yeah. Patience. I have it tattooed. Patience. It taught me a lot of patience, because throughout all of the bad, there's good, I'm here right now. How amazing. When I remember being 12 years old, I used to lay down by my bed and pray, God, please don't let me live past 17 years old. I didn't want to be alive. My cousin killed himself when he was 24 years old, and I didn't want to be alive. I didn't want to live. And to be here, to be sitting here, just to be living, I never thought I'd even see Los Angeles in my lifetime, and here I am. And all of this has just taught me to have patience with myself, with others, very grateful for it all.
All right.
So
Gracie, thank you
that's
so much
it.
for sharing your
I'm
story.
sorry it took so long.